Have you ever had a season in your life where you feel like your faith was being put to the test? I've been through a few things in my life here and there, and I know that every time that there's something that goes wrong, every time that there's something that comes up that isn't the way that we would plan it to be, that isn't what we would think that God would allow to come our way, it can shake our faith a little bit. It can rock our faith, whether that's something that's a physical thing, like a physical illness or health condition or injury, whether that's a mental thing where you're struggling with something like anxiety or depression or something else. Maybe it's a financial situation where you're like, man, you don't know how you're going to pay the bills at the end of the month. Whatever it is, it could be a social thing. It could be a spiritual thing that happens to you. It can shake your faith, can't it? Well, verse that I want to look at today, I hope will be a little comforting to you if you feel like there's just something going on in your life that just isn't quite the way you feel like it should be. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, starting in verse 7. Paul's writing, and he says this: "A thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited." And get this, he says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. So Paul's praying 3 different times, God, please take this away. And notice what God says. He doesn't give Paul the answer that Paul would have wished that God would have given him. In verse 9 it says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." So what does that mean? I mean, God says, hey, I'm not going to take away this thorn from you, Paul, this thorn in your flesh, whatever that is, whether that's a real physical thing or that's a mental thing or a spiritual thing. I'm not going to take that away from you, Paul. That's something you're going to have to live with. Why? Because my grace is sufficient. And when you are weak, God's strength and his power in your life shows through all the more. And I look at that passage and I go, man, I feel like there are some things in my life that I could say, man, there's this thorn in my life and I wish that God would just take it away. And sometimes I wonder if God's answer to me is the same thing. My grace is enough. My grace is sufficient. Because if you think about it, God's grace is enough of a reward, isn't it? The fact that we can be forgiven, the fact that we can be set free from the chains and the bondage of our sin, the fact that we can be adopted into the family of God and be considered like his sons or daughters and receive the inheritance of heaven one day when we die if we just put our faith and our trust and our allegiance in Christ. Man, that's reward enough, isn't it? I mean, what else can we ask for? We've won the lottery here. This is the jackpot, right? But in this time, there will be some thorns. There will be some tests in your life. But God's grace is enough. And sometimes I got to wonder, do we really believe that? Because if we just focus on that, focus on God's grace, that's going to be enough to get us through. And remember, God's power is made more evident and more great in your life when you are weak, as opposed to when you're strong. I mean, it shows a lot more of God's power and the amazing grace of God when he takes somebody who is weak and he shows his strength and power through that person's life. So if you take nothing away from this, just get this, okay? On the other side of every single test is a testimony. Anytime you're going through a struggle, on the other side of that test, there's a testimony. There's a story. There is the power of God that can be seen as he helps you get through those difficult times. His grace is enough. That's the reward, and you've already got it. So rest in that and boast about your weakness as Paul does here, because God's strength is going to be made known even through our difficulties.